to have you around to attempt your petty confidence tricks on me once more. I rejoice to find I had not overestimated mankind as long as I can see one aspect of it embodied in your homely face and bad complexion, as the great Gilbert so mildly put it. I shall give orders to triple lock the petty cash, to count the stamp money diligently, to watch all checks for inept forgery. Welcome back to the Intelligencer, and be grateful for nature's mistakes, since they afford you employment as well as existence. But enough of the friendly garrulousness of an old man whose powers are failing. Remove your unwholesome-looking person from my sight and convey the decrepit vehicle of your spirit to San Diego. It is but a gesture. I expect no coherent words from your clogged and sputtery pen. But while I am sufficiently like yourself to deceive the public into thinking you have written what they read, I am not yet great enough scoundrel to do so without your visiting the scene of your presumed labors. Go! And do not stop on the way to draw expense money from the cashier, for she has strict orders not to pay it. Jealousy. Nothing but jealousy, I thought, first of my literary ability and now of my independence of his crazy whims. I turned my back deliberately and walked slowly out to show my contempt for his rantings. In my heart now, there was little doubt the new grass was an extension of the old, and it didn't take more than a single look at the overrun park to confirm this. The same creeping runners, growing perceptibly from instant to instant, the same brilliant color, the same towering central mass gorged with food. I could have described it line by line and blade by blade in my sleep. I wasted no more time gazing at it, but hurried away after hardly more than a minute's inspection. I could take no credit for my perceptivity, since everyone in San Diego knew as well as I that this was no duplicate freak, but the same, the identical, the fearsome grass. But a quite understandable conspiracy had been tacitly entered into. The knowledge was successfully hushed until property could be disposed of before it became quite worthless. The conspiracy defeated itself, however, with so many frantic sellers competing against each other, and the news was out by the time the first of my new columns appeared in the Intelligencer. The first question which occurred to those of us calm enough to escape panic was, how had the weed jumped the salt band? It was answered simultaneously by many learned professors whose desire to break into print and share the front page with the terrible grass overcame their natural academic reticence. There was no doubt that originally the peculiar veracity of the inoculated plant had not been inherited, but it was equally uncontroverted that somehow, during the period it had been halted by the salt, a mutation had happened, and now every wind blowing over the weed carried seeds no longer innocent, but bearing embryos of the destroyer. Terror ran before the grass like a herald. The shock felt when Los Angeles went down was multiplied tenfold. Now there was no predictable course men could shape their actions to avoid. No longer was it possible to watch and chart the daily advance of a single body, so a partially accurate picture could be formed of what might be expected tomorrow. Instead of one mass, there were countless ones. At the whim of a chance wind or bird, seeds might alight in an area apparently safe and overwhelm a community miles away from the living glacier. No place was out of range of the attack. No square foot of land kept any value. The stock market crashed, and I congratulated myself on having sent Flea's orders to sell. A day or two later, the exchanges were closed, and, shortly after, the banks. Business came to a practical standstill. The great industries shut down, and all normal transactions of daily life were conducted by means of barter. For the first time in 3/4 of a century, the farmer was top dog. His eggs and milk, his wheat and corn and potatoes, he could exchange for whatever he fancied, and on his own terms. Fortunately for starving city dwellers, his appetite for manufactured articles and for luxuries was insatiable. Their automobiles, fur coats, costume jewelry, washing machines, Files of the National Geographic and their period furniture left the city flat for the farm, to come back in the more acceptable form of steaks, butter, fowl, and turnips. The whole elaborate structure of money and credit seemed to disappear overnight, like some tenuous dream. The frenzied actions of the human beings had no effect on the grass. The salt bands still stood inviolate, as did smaller counterparts hastily laid around the earlier of the seed-borne growths, but everywhere else the grass swept ahead like a tidal wave, its speed seemingly increased by the months of repression behind. It swallowed San Diego in a gulp, and leaped beyond the United States to take in Baja California in one swift downward lick. It sprang upon the deserts, whose lack of water was no deterrent, now always sending little groups ahead like paratroopers or fifth columnists. They established positions till the main body came up and consolidated them. It curled up the high mountains, leaving only the snow on their peaks unmolested, and it jumped over struggling rivers with the dexterity of a girl playing hopscotch. It lunged eastward into Arizona and Nevada. It swarmed north up the San Joaquin Valley through Fresno and spilled over the lip of the High Sierras toward Lake Tahoe. New Los Angeles, its back protected by the Salton Sea, was, like the original one, subjected to a pincer movement which strangled the promising life from it before it was 2 years old. Forced to move again, La Facecie characteristically demanded the burden fall upon the employees of the paper, paying them off in scrip on the poor excuse that no money was available. I saw no future in staying with this sinking ship, and eager to be back at the center of things, Fleas wrote me that the large stock of pemmican which had been accumulating without buyers could now be very profitably disposed of. I severed my connection for the second time with the Intelligencer and returned to my proper sphere. This, of course, did not mean that I failed to follow each step of the grass. Such a course would have been quite impossible, since its every move affected the life and fortune of every citizen. By some strange freak, it spared the entire coast north of Santa Barbara. Whether it had some disinclination to approach salt water, it had been notably slow in its original advance westward, or whether it was sheer accident, San Luis Obispo, Monterey, and San Francisco remained untouched as the cities to the south and east were buried under grassy avalanches. This odd mercy raised queer hopes in some. Perhaps their town or their state would be saved. The prostration of the country, which had begun with the first wave of panic, could not be allowed to continue. The government moved in and seized first the banks and then the railroads. Abandoned real estate was declared forfeit and open to homesteading. Prices were pegged, and farmers forced to pay taxes in produce. Although these measures restored a similitude of life to the nation, it remained but a feeble imitation of its previous self. Many of the idle factories failed to reopen, others moved with painful caution. Goods, already scarce, disappeared almost completely, and at the same time a reckless disregard of formerly sacred symbols seized upon the people. The grass was coming, so what good was the lot on which they were paying installments? The grass was coming, so why gather together the dollars to meet the interest on the mortgage? The grass was coming. What was the use of depositing money in the bank, which would probably go bust tomorrow? The inflation would have been worse had it not been for the pegged prices and other stern measures. The glut on the labor market was tremendous, and wages reached the vanishing point in a currency which would buy little. Suddenly, the United States, which had so long boasted of being the richest country in the world, found itself desperately poor. Government work projects did little to relieve the suffering of the proletariat. Deaths from malnutrition mounted, and the feeble strikes in the few operating industries were easily and quickly crushed by starving strikebreakers, ashamed of their deed, yet desperately eager to feed their hungry families. Riots broke out in New York and Detroit, but the police were fortunately well fed, and the arms wielding the blackjacks which crushed the skulls of the undernourished rioters were stout. There was a sweeping revival of organized religion, and men too broke to afford the neighborhood movie flocked to the churches. Brother Paul, now on a national hookup, repeated his exhortations to all Christians, urging them to join their Savior in the midst of the grass. There was great agitation for restraining him. More reserved pastors pointed